Story 1. Jonathan Marcus Green was born on December 23, 1967. He was born in Montgomery County, Texas. Montgomery County is a rural area located about 50 miles north of the city of Houston. This part of Texas has many small towns, farms, and wooded areas. Green grew up in this rural environment. Green lived in a very small community called Dobbin. Dobbin was not a large town. It had few people and many dirt roads. The houses in Dobbin were spread far apart from each other. Many families in Dobbin knew each other because the community was so small. Green's family was not wealthy. They lived in a simple house. The house was a white wood frame building. It was a single-story house that sat on blocks. The house had a chain-link fence around it. Green lived in this house for many years. He stayed in the same area where he was born. Green went to school in Montgomery County. He completed 11 years of education. He did not finish high school. He left school before graduating. After leaving school, Green worked as a laborer. A laborer is a person who does physical work. He did different types of manual jobs. He did not have a professional career. Green did not have any prior prison record before the events that would come later. He had never been sent to prison. However, he did have some past incidents that showed he could be violent. These incidents happened before the crime that would change his life. One incident involved a pony. In January 2000, a pony was stolen from a pasture in Dobbin. The pony belonged to a woman named Erin Irby. On February 6, 2000, the pony was found dead in a wooded area near Green's home. The pony had been stabbed to death. The pony was tied to a tree. There was a worn track around the tree where the animal had circled for some time before being killed. A pair of shears and a broken butcher knife were found near the pony's body. Both had blood on them. When Green was questioned about this, he admitted that the shears were his. He claimed that the shears had been stolen from him a few weeks earlier. A fingerprint was found on the shears. The fingerprint matched Green's left middle finger. Green also had encounters with women that were violent. One woman named Micah McCoy later said that Green raped her. This happened about 4 years before the later crime. She said that she was walking down a dirt road late at night. Green dragged her to his property. He pushed her to the ground and placed her in a choke hold. He forced his fingers down her throat, which made her vomit. He told her he would kill her and break her neck if she screamed. He ripped off her clothes and raped her. She escaped but did not report the rape at that time. She had an outstanding arrest warrant, so she was afraid to go to the police. Another woman named Josie Jimenez said that Green entered her home without permission in July 1999. She said he jumped on top of her and demanded sex. She tried to defend herself, but he forced himself on her. She did report this to the police. She was taken to a medical center. However, when the case went to a grand jury, she was too afraid of Green to appear and testify. She also said there was another time when Green tried to rape her. On that occasion, she had a pocket knife and was able to fight him off. Green did not have a steady romantic relationship. He lived alone in his house in Dobbin. His neighbors were families. One family that lived near him was the Jimenez family. They lived on the property behind his house. Another family that lived across the highway from him was the Neal family. The Neal family had 3 daughters. Green knew these neighbors because he lived in the same small community. Green had a habit of burning things in his backyard. He had a burn pile on his property. A burn pile is a place where people put trash and set it on fire to get rid of it. Green rarely burned anything in his backyard. Most of the time, the burn pile sat there unused. People in the community knew Green. They saw him around the area. He was known as a laborer who lived alone in the white house with the chain-link fence. He kept to himself mostly. He did not have many friends in the community. Green had a temper. This was shown in how he reacted to small things. When he was later held in jail while waiting for his trial, his behavior became worse. He threatened officers for small reasons. He threatened to assault an officer for taking a toothbrush and a bowl of food from him. He threatened a deputy because the deputy would not give him a second glass of juice. He also threatened another inmate. He told that inmate he would make his heart stop. He assaulted another inmate by slamming his head against a wall. He also had a violent encounter with one of his jailers. It took 5 or 6 officers to subdue him. Green did not have any mental health treatment records that were known to the public before these events. He lived his life in Dobbin. He worked as a laborer. He stayed in the same small community where he was born. He had a history of violent behavior toward women and animals. He had a temper that showed itself in small and large ways. He lived alone in his house. He knew his neighbors but did not have close friendships. The people in Dobbin knew him as a man who kept to himself and had a bad temper. The days in Dobbin were quiet. The roads were dirt. The houses were far apart. The community was small. Jonathan Green was part of that community. He lived there his whole life. He worked, he stayed in his house, and he had run-ins with people that showed his violent side. But on the surface, he was just a laborer living in a rural Texas town. On the evening of June 21st, 2000, a 12-year-old girl named Christina Neal was at a friend's house. The friend's name was Maria Jimenez. Maria lived just down the street from Christina's home in Dobbin. Christina was with her older sister Victoria, who was 16. They had gone to Maria's house together. Victoria's boyfriend, Manuel Jimenez, had driven them there. Manuel was also Maria's uncle. While they were standing outside at Maria's house, Christina and Victoria started to argue. Victoria walked away from the argument and went toward Maria's house. She left Christina outside with Maria's brother Jose. A short time later, Jose told Victoria that Christina was angry and had left. Christina walked away from Maria's house. She started walking home. It was around 11 o'clock at night. Christina never made it home. On her way, she crossed paths with Jonathan Green. Green lived nearby. His house was about half a mile from the Neal family's home. Green saw Christina walking alone in the dark. He took her. He forced her to go with him to his house. He kidnapped her. Once Green had Christina inside his house, he attacked her. He sexually assaulted her. He hurt her in a way that caused bruising to her upper left thigh and pelvic area. The medical examiner later found these injuries and said they were very common on sexual assault victims. After the sexual assault, Green killed Christina. He strangled her. He used ligatures, which are cords or ropes, to tie her neck and her wrists. He tied her arms behind her back. The ligatures around her neck cut off her air and caused her death. Christina was only 12 years old. She died in Green's house. Green now had a body to get rid of. He did not want anyone to find Christina. He decided to burn her clothing and personal items. He had a burn pile in his backyard. A burn pile is where people put trash to burn. Green took Christina's clothes and other belongings. He put them on the burn pile and set them on fire. The fire was very large. He burned her clothing and personal effects to destroy evidence. After burning her things, Green buried Christina's body. He dug a shallow grave in his backyard. The grave was near the burn pile. The hole was about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and several feet deep. He put her body in the ground and covered it with dirt. The next day, June 22nd, 2000, Green did something that caught attention. He had a very large fire in his burn pile. A neighbor named Manuel Jimenez saw this fire. Manuel lived on the property behind Green's house. He noticed the fire because it was unusually big. He also knew that Green rarely burned anything in his backyard. Manuel remembered this fire because he was afraid it might spread to his own property. He did not know at that time that Green was burning a young girl's belongings. While Green was hiding what he had done, Christina's family started searching for her. Victoria had gone home after the argument. She thought Christina was angry, but would come back. The next morning, Christina was not there. Her father Victor assumed she was asleep in her room. But when he came home from work later that day, his daughters told him Christina never came home. Victor asked them to go to Maria's house to tell Christina to come home. They went, but Christina was not there. The family began searching the neighborhood. They found Christina's glasses on the road near their home. The glasses were smashed and broken. Christina had run away before and had a habit of destroying her glasses when she got angry, so the family did not think it was too strange at first. They kept searching. The next morning, Victor asked his sister Teresa to look for Christina. He told her to report Christina as a runaway if she could not find her. Teresa could not find Christina. She reported her missing to a Montgomery County Sheriff's deputy. The police then joined the search. On June 26th, the FBI joined the search as well. On that same day, Christina's sister Jennifer and her mother Laura found a pair of pink underwear near the edge of the woods across from the Neal home. They thought it might belong to Christina. Around that same time, Victoria found Christina's bracelet and necklace along a pathway in the woods. These items were found near Green's property, but at that point the police did not know who had taken Christina. The police began interviewing people in the neighborhood. On June 28th, they spoke to Jonathan Green. Green told them he had no information about Christina's disappearance. He said that on the night she disappeared, he was either at home or at his neighbor's house. He lied about his whereabouts. The police asked if they could search his home and property. Green said yes, but he insisted that he be present during the search. The police did a quick search of his house and the area around it. They did not find anything important at that time. A few days later, the police talked to Green again. They asked him again about where he was on the night Christina disappeared. Green gave the same answer. He said he was at home or at his neighbor's. He continued to lie. On July 19th, a new piece of information came to light. Manuel Jimenez, the neighbor who had seen the large fire, told the FBI about it. He said that the day after Christina disappeared, Green had a very large fire in his burn pile. He told the FBI that Green rarely burned anything, so this fire was unusual. Because of this tip, the FBI agents went back to Green's house a few days later. They asked Green if they could search his property again. This time they specifically wanted to search the burn pile area. Green agreed. He said they could search, but he insisted on being there while they did it. Two FBI agents, Mark Young and Sue Hillard, walked around the burn pile with Green. Agent Young took a metal probe. A metal probe is a long metal rod that can be pushed into the ground to check for changes in the soil. Agent Young pushed the probe into different parts of the ground. In one area, the probe sank 3 feet into the ground very easily. This meant the ground had been disturbed recently. The soil had been dug up and then put back. Agent Young also smelled a very strong, distinct odor coming from that spot. He recognized the smell as the odor of a decaying body. The agents began to get their shovels and equipment ready to dig in that area. They wanted to see what was buried there. Green had been calm and cooperative up to this point, but when he saw them preparing to dig, he became very angry. He ordered them to stop. He told them to get off his property. He took back his permission for the search. The agents had to leave. The agents knew they needed a search warrant. A search warrant is a legal document that gives police the right to search a place even if the owner does not give permission. They went to a judge and explained what they had found. They told the judge about the large fire, the disturbed ground, and the smell of decay. The judge agreed there was probable cause. Probable cause means there is a good reason to believe a crime has been committed and evidence will be found. The judge signed the search warrant. While the agents were away getting the search warrant, Green was busy. He knew they would come back with a warrant. He went to his backyard. He dug up the burn pile area. He removed the body of Christina Neal from the shallow grave. He took the body inside his house. He wrapped the body in a blanket. He put the wrapped body inside a blue laundry bag. Then he hid the bag behind a recliner chair that was wedged into a corner of his living room. He also changed his clothes. He wanted to make it look like the grave had never held a body. He put trash on top of the hole to try to hide it. The agents returned to Green's property later that night. They had the search warrant. When they went to the burn pile, they saw that part of it had been dug up. There was a hole that looked like a shallow grave. The grave was empty. A very strong, foul odor came from the hole. It was the smell of a dead body in a decaying state. The agents asked Green what had happened to the burn pile while they were gone. Green told them that he had dug it out. He said he did this to show them that there was no dead body buried there. This was another lie. He had moved the body to hide it, but the smell remained. The agents saw that the ground had been disturbed and the grave was empty. They knew something had been there. They decided to bring in a special dog. A cadaver dog is a dog that is trained to find human remains. The dog could search the property and find where the body had been moved. The agents called for a cadaver dog to come to the property. They prepared to search the entire area, including Green's house. The cadaver dog arrived at Green's property. The dog was trained to find human remains. The dog and its handler began walking toward the burn pile. On the way, the dog stopped and alerted near Green's house. The dog signaled that it smelled something inside. The handler and FBI agent Sue Hillard entered the house with the dog. The dog went straight to a recliner chair that was pushed into a corner of the room. The dog kept going back to that same spot. Agent Hillard looked behind the chair with a flashlight. She saw a human foot sticking out of a blue bag. She had found Christina Neal's body. Before anyone told Green that a body had been found in his house, Green made a strange statement. He was overheard saying, "Those Mexicans are setting me up and put a body in my house." He said this without knowing that the police had already discovered the body behind his chair. This statement showed that he knew there was a body in his house. He was already trying to blame someone else. The police recovered Christina's body from behind the chair. She was wrapped in a blanket and stuffed inside the blue laundry bag. There were ligatures or cords around her neck and wrists. Her arms were tied behind her back. The police also recovered burned remnants of her clothing and personal effects from the burn pile on Green's property. These were the items Green had tried to destroy. The medical examiner, Dr. Joy Carter, performed an autopsy on Christina's body. She examined the ligature mark around Christina's neck. She concluded that Christina had been strangled to death. The medical examiner also found bruising to the front and back of Christina's neck. She found bruising to Christina's upper left thigh and pelvic region. She determined that these injuries were very common in sexual assault victims. She concluded that Christina had been sexually assaulted before she died. Forensic scientists collected evidence from Christina's body and from Green's property. They found 2 black hairs in Christina's pubic area. These hairs did not look like Christina's own hair. The medical examiner determined that the hairs must have been present before her body was wrapped in the blanket. They could not have been transferred there afterward by accident. Scientists did mitochondrial DNA testing on the hairs. This type of DNA testing showed that 99.7% of the African American population could be excluded as the source of the hair. Green was African American. He could not be excluded from the remaining 0.3%. This meant the hair matched Green, or someone with very similar DNA. The scientists also found fibers. They found fibers from the hole in Green's backyard. These fibers matched fibers found on Green's clothing. Other fibers from the hole matched fibers from the blue bag that held Christina's body. They also matched fibers from the ligatures. The scientists found fibers from the carpet in Green's house. These carpet fibers matched fibers found on Christina's underwear. The underwear had been found in the woods 5 days after Christina disappeared, nearly a month before her body was discovered. The carpet fibers also matched a piece of cloth found in Christina's mouth. This proved that Christina had been inside Green's house before she died. The police arrested Jonathan Green. He was charged with capital murder. The charge was that he intentionally caused Christina's death by strangulation while he was in the course of committing kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault. The trial began in July 2002 in Montgomery County. During the trial, the prosecution presented all of the evidence. They showed the jury the DNA results, the fiber matches, the ligatures, and the medical examiner's findings. They showed that Green had kidnapped Christina, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her to death. They showed how he had tried to burn her belongings, bury her body, and then move the body when the police got close. Green's defense did not call any witnesses. They did not present any evidence to counter the prosecution's case. Green claimed that someone else had placed Christina's body in his house to set him up. The jury found Green guilty of capital murder. The next phase of the trial was the punishment phase. In this phase, the jury had to decide if Green should get life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecution presented evidence of Green's past violent behavior. They told the jury about the 2 prior sexual assaults. They told them about the stolen pony that was stabbed to death. They told them about Green's misdemeanor conviction for unlawfully carrying a weapon. They also told them about Green's violent behavior while in jail. He had threatened officers and other inmates. He had assaulted inmates and had to be subdued by many officers. The jury considered all of this evidence. They decided that Green would continue to be a threat to society. They found that there was not enough evidence to justify a life sentence. On July 17, 2002, the jury sentenced Jonathan Green to death. After the sentence, Green appealed his case. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case. On December 1, 2004, they affirmed his conviction and sentence. They found that the evidence was sufficient and that the trial had been fair. Green then filed a state habeas corpus application. This is a request to have the conviction reviewed for errors. On March 23, 2005, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his application. Green then took his case to the federal courts. He filed a federal habeas corpus petition. The U.S. District Court in Houston denied his petition on February 15, 2008. They also denied a certificate of appealability, which is permission to appeal. Green appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On February 27, 2009, they also denied a certificate of appealability. Green then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. On October 5, 2009, the Supreme Court refused to hear his case. An execution date was set for June 30, 2010. However, Green's lawyers argued that he was incompetent to be executed. They said he had severe mental illness. A judge held a hearing and found Green competent. But the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals stayed the execution to review that decision. The court later affirmed that Green was competent. The execution was rescheduled. In September 2012, Green's lawyers again filed motions to stop the execution. On October 8, 2012, a federal district court in Houston granted a stay of execution. They wanted to reconsider his mental illness claim. Texas prosecutors appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On October 9th, the Fifth Circuit overturned the stay. They ruled that Green had not shown enough evidence to prove he was incompetent. The execution was back on. On the day of the execution, October 10th, 2012, Green's lawyers made one final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The execution was delayed for nearly 5 hours. The Supreme Court eventually rejected the appeal. The execution could proceed. At 10:45 p.m. Central Daylight Time, Green was put to death by lethal injection. The warden asked if he wanted to make a final statement. He first said no. Then he changed his mind. He said, "I'm an innocent man. I did not kill anyone. Y'all are killing an innocent man." He then said, "My left arm is killing me. It hurts bad." He then lost consciousness and was pronounced dead. Christina's parents, Victor and Laura Neal, watched Green die. They had waited for justice for their daughter for more than 10 years. After the execution, Laura Neal reflected on what had happened. She said that Christina did not have any rights. She was only 12 years old and never hurt anyone. She said she often wondered if Christina was screaming or calling for her mom and dad. Christina's sister Victoria also carried guilt. She said she could have walked home with her sister, and maybe Christina would still be alive. Christina's father Victor said it was like someone ripped his heart out. The death of Jonathan Green ended his life, but it did not bring Christina Neal back. Her family continued to live with the loss of a 12-year-old girl who liked to play basketball and football, and who never had the chance to grow up. The case of Jonathan Marcus Green was closed, but the pain of Christina's murder remained with those who loved her. Story 2. Eric Donald Robert was born on May 31st, 1962, in the state of Massachusetts. His father left the family when Eric was only 6 months old. After his father was gone, Eric's mother moved with Eric and his younger sister to Hayward, Wisconsin, where they settled and lived for many years. Eric grew up in Hayward. His mother worked very hard to support the family. She held down 3 different jobs at the same time. In addition to working, she also went to college to earn her own degree. Because his mother was so busy, Eric had to take on many responsibilities at home. He became like a father figure to his younger sister. He took care of her and made sure she was safe. He did the grocery shopping, cooked dinner, and took out the trash. He also shoveled snow in the winter, and in Hayward there was a lot of snow. His sister later said that Eric did everything for the family while their mother worked and studied. Eric was a very good student throughout his school years. In 1980, he graduated from Hayward High School. He finished 18th in his class, which meant he was among the top students. After high school, he went to the University of Wisconsin-Superior. He worked on weekends and during summer breaks to pay for his college tuition. He did not ask his mother for any money because she was already paying for her own education. In 1987, Eric graduated from college with a degree in biology and a minor in chemistry. After college, he found work as a chemist for a company called Murphy Oil in Superior, Wisconsin. He started that job in 1988. He worked there for several years. In 1992, Eric returned to Hayward. He began coaching youth baseball teams, which meant he worked with young boys who played the sport. He also joined a volunteer emergency medical service, or EMT, where he helped respond to medical emergencies in the community. Around that same time, he met a woman whom he would have a long romantic relationship with. She had gone to high school with him, but they did not know each other well back then. They became reacquainted when he started coaching her son's baseball team. Soon after, Eric moved in with her and her 2 children. At first, the relationship went well. However, over time, the woman saw a different side of Eric. She later said that he was an aggressive and mean person. She said he did not like other people and always wanted to be in control. During their relationship, there were several violent incidents. On one occasion, they were sitting on a couch together, and Eric struck her across the face with the back of his hand because she made a comment he did not like. She hit him back, but then she realized he would retaliate. He punched her in the mouth so hard that her bottom teeth went through her lip. When they went to the emergency room, Eric told the doctors and nurses that she had slipped on icy steps while carrying groceries. He knew many of the hospital employees because of his work as an EMT. On another occasion, she ended up in the emergency room again with a broken foot. Eric gave the same type of excuse for that injury as well. Later, after they had separated, Eric showed up at her house while he was drunk. He started a fight with her. During the fight, he dragged her around the yard by her hair. She called the police, but she later dropped the charges because she was afraid he would hurt her again. She also said that Eric would force her to come to bed without clothing and would beat her until she agreed to have sex with him. She told herself that because she eventually gave in, it was not rape, but later she realized that it was. There was another former girlfriend who accused Eric of rape in 2002. The incident happened in Brule County, Wisconsin. She did not file criminal charges, but she did go to court and was granted a protection order against him. In her statement to the judge, she said that Eric had held her against her while after they spent a day looking for apartments in Chamberlain, South Dakota. Despite these personal problems, Eric continued to work and build a professional life. From 1994 to 1999, he worked at a wastewater treatment plant in Cable, Wisconsin. During that time, he and his girlfriend built a house together in the rural community of Drummond, which was more than an hour southeast of Superior. From 1999 to 2000, he worked for the Bayfield County Zoning Office in Wisconsin. Then, from 2000 to 2004, he managed a wastewater treatment plant in Superior. Later, he also consulted for that same plant. At work, people saw a different person. His co-workers and supervisors described him as a natural-born leader. One city official said that Eric accomplished more in 18 months on the job than others had done for decades. Another co-worker said he seemed like a nice person. Eric was also a volunteer in his community. He gave his time to the ambulance service and helped in other ways. When a sheriff named Richard Parquette was killed in a domestic dispute, Eric helped raise funds to build a memorial for him. Eric did not know the sheriff personally, but he said he wanted to do what was right. However, Eric eventually lost his job in Superior because he did not follow a city rule that required employees to live within the city limits. He continued to work as a consultant for the city after he lost his full-time position. People who knew him said that Eric could become very aggressive when he drank alcohol. But they also noted that Eric had stopped drinking on his own. He made that decision to control his aggression. In 2005, Eric moved to Piedmont, South Dakota. He moved there to help a friend with her business. He slept in his truck to save money on hotel costs. He worked for the friend all summer without getting paid. At that time, he had more than $200,000 in assets and no debt. His sister said that Eric had done more good in his life than many people in the world. Eric had a successful career, a college education, and a history of helping others. But he also had a hidden pattern of anger and violence toward women that most people did not see. After Eric Robert moved to Piedmont, South Dakota, in 2005 to help his friend with her business, he committed his first serious crime in that state. On July 24, 2005, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, Robert was driving his pickup truck on a rural road near Black Hawk, South Dakota. He saw an 18-year-old woman driving her car alone. Robert turned on bright spotlights on his truck and pulled her over. He got out and told the young woman that he was an undercover police officer. He asked her to perform field sobriety tests, which are tests to check if someone has been drinking. The woman was suspicious because Robert was not wearing a uniform and had no badge or identification. He was wearing only a t-shirt and jeans and had an unshaven look, but she still followed his instructions. Robert then told her to empty out the trunk of her car. When she did that, he grabbed her and forced her into the trunk of her own car. He closed the trunk lid. The woman had a cell phone in her pocket. She called a friend and told her friend what was happening. While she was on the phone, Robert drove his truck to a nearby lot. Then he returned to where he had stopped her car and drove her car to the same lot. He parked it there and then left the area on foot. The woman continued to talk to her friend on the phone, and the friend called the sheriff's department. Because Robert heard the woman talking on her phone while she was in the trunk, he became scared and ran away. He did not hurt her further. Detectives later found Robert and his pickup truck. He had shaved his head and face to change his appearance. At first, he denied any involvement. In the back of his truck, detectives found a bed, an axe, rope, and pornography. Robert eventually admitted that he had pulled the woman over and forced her into the trunk. He was arrested and charged with kidnapping. In January 2006, a judge sentenced Robert to 80 years in prison. The judge said that the Robert who lived in Wisconsin was a different person from the Robert who committed this crime in South Dakota. Robert was sent to the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls to serve his sentence. Inside the prison, Robert became more angry and bitter over time. In 2007, prison officials found that a lock had been cut in the shower room where Robert worked. They accused him of trying to escape. Robert argued that other inmates had set him up, but he was still classified as a high-security inmate because of the incident. Over the next few years, Robert fought several legal battles from inside prison. In 2009, he asked for a sentence reduction, but that request was denied. Then he asked to be transferred to a prison in Wisconsin so he could be closer to his mother. That request was also denied. These failures made Robert's anger grow. He began to see himself as a soldier in a war against the prison staff and the system. He believed that the prison officials were his oppressors. Robert began to plan an escape. He decided that if anyone stood in his way during the escape, he would kill that person. He started working with another inmate named Rodney Burgett. Burgett had been in and out of prison for many years and was serving life sentences for other serious crimes. The two men agreed to work together. They also involved a third inmate named Michael Nordman. Nordman agreed to provide materials that would help with the escape plan. Robert and Burgett obtained a heavy metal pipe, which they planned to use as a weapon. They also obtained plastic wrap. They stored these items and waited for the right time to act. On April 12, 2011, the plan went into action. That morning, a corrections officer named Ronald Johnson reported for work at the prison. Johnson was 63 years old that day. It was his birthday. He had been a corrections officer for more than 20 years. He was not scheduled to work that day, but another officer had called in sick, so Johnson agreed to cover that officer's shift. He arrived at the prison at 7:30 in the morning and took his post in a building called Pheasantland Industries. This was a building inside the prison walls where inmates worked on projects like upholstery, signs, and custom furniture. Johnson was the only officer working in that building that morning. At about 10:30 in the morning, Robert and Burgett walked into the Pheasantland Industries building. They were carrying a load of laundry, which gave them a reason to be moving around the prison. However, both men were classified as maximum security inmates, which meant they were not allowed to be in that particular building. They entered anyway. They had already hidden the metal pipe and plastic wrap inside the building. Once inside, they found a place to hide and waited for Johnson to come near them. When Johnson walked past their hiding spot, Robert and Burgett came up behind him. They struck him in the head with the metal pipe. They hit him many times, even after he fell to the ground. The blows were so strong that they fractured his skull in at least 3 places. Johnson tried to defend himself, and he suffered wounds on his hands and arms from trying to block the attacks. After Johnson was on the ground and unable to fight back, the 2 inmates wrapped his head in plastic wrap. They did this to stop him from making noise, and also to stop him from breathing. Then they dragged his body behind a large crate in the building to hide it from view. After Johnson was dead, Robert took off Johnson's uniform. He put on Johnson's brown pants, his jacket, his hat, and his shoes. Burgett climbed into a large box that was placed on a wheeled cart. Robert then pushed the cart toward the west gate of the prison. He kept his head down so that other officers would not look closely at his face. He hoped that because he was wearing Johnson's uniform, the guards would think he was Johnson and let him through the gate with the cart. Robert pushed the cart through one of the inner doors. However, a corrections officer named Jody Hall noticed that Robert did not swipe an electronic identification card as he passed through. She asked him about it. Robert said he had forgotten his badge and that the main control office did not have any temporary cards. Hall did not believe his explanation. She called another officer named Matthew Freeberg and asked if he recognized the guard who was pushing the cart. Freeberg said he did not recognize him. Hall then called for a supervisor to come to the area. When Robert realized that the officers were becoming suspicious, he knew the plan was failing. At that moment, Burgett jumped out of the box. Together, Robert and Burgett attacked Officer Freeberg. They used Johnson's radio as a weapon and beat Freeberg with it. Officer Hall sent an emergency call over her radio. While Burgett continued to attack Freeberg, Robert ran toward the outer gate and tried to climb over it. He reached the top of the gate, but he became tangled in the razor wire that was placed there to stop escapes. He could not get over the gate. More officers arrived at the scene. Robert then tried to grab a gun from one of the responding officers, but he was not able to do that. He and Burgett tried to get the officers to shoot them by acting aggressively, but the officers did not fire. Surrounded and with no way out, Robert shook Burgett's hand, and the two men surrendered. They were taken into custody inside the prison grounds. After the surrender, prison staff began searching for Officer Johnson because Robert was wearing his uniform. They found Johnson's body behind the crate in the Pheasantland Industries building. His face was badly swollen and disfigured from the beating. An officer tried to perform CPR, and medical personnel arrived and continued life-saving efforts on the way to the hospital. But those efforts did not work. Ronald Johnson was declared dead at the hospital. He died on his 63rd birthday. He left behind a wife, 2 children, and 6 grandchildren. After Robert and Burgett surrendered at the West Gate, prison officers immediately began a full search of the facility to find Officer Ronald Johnson. They knew Robert was wearing Johnson's uniform, which meant Johnson was somewhere without his clothes. Officers went to the Pheasantland Industries building and looked behind the large crate where the 2 inmates had hidden the body. They found Johnson lying on the floor. His head was wrapped in plastic wrap, and his face was badly swollen and disfigured from the beating. An officer began CPR right away. Medical staff arrived and continued emergency treatment while Johnson was taken to the hospital. But the injuries were too severe. The doctors could not save him. Ronald Johnson was pronounced dead at the hospital. His family was notified of his death on his 63rd birthday. An official investigation began immediately. Investigators collected evidence from the scene. They found the metal pipe that had been used to strike Johnson. They found the plastic wrap that had been placed over his head. They also found Johnson's uniform, which Robert had been wearing when he tried to leave the prison. Officers took statements from the witnesses, including Officer Jody Hall, who had noticed Robert did not swipe his ID card, and Officer Matthew Freeberg, who had been attacked by both inmates. The investigation also looked into the planning of the escape. They determined that the 3rd inmate, Michael Nordman, had provided materials that Robert and Burgett used in the killing. Nordman was charged separately for his role. The state prosecutors charged Eric Robert with first-degree murder. Because the crime was committed against a corrections officer while he was on duty, and because Robert was an inmate trying to escape at the time, the case qualified for the death penalty under South Dakota law. Robert did not fight the charge. On September 16, 2011, he appeared in court and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He also waived his right to have a jury decide his sentence. Instead, he agreed to let the judge make that decision. Robert instructed his lawyers not to present any evidence that might reduce his punishment. He did not want them to talk about his good deeds or his past. He said that the person who had done good things no longer existed. The judge, Bradley Zell, held a pre-sentence hearing that lasted 4 days. At the hearing, the state presented evidence to prove that there were aggravating circumstances. These are factors that make the crime serious enough for the death penalty. The state proved 2 aggravating factors. The first was that the offense was committed against a law enforcement officer or corrections employee while he was doing his official job. The second was that the offense was committed by a person who was in lawful custody or confinement at the time. The judge agreed that both factors had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge also considered any mitigating evidence, which are factors that could reduce the punishment. Even though Robert did not want to present such evidence, the judge looked at the entire record to find any possible mitigation. The judge found that Robert was intelligent, had a college education, and had once been a productive member of society. But the judge also considered Robert's violent history, including the 2005 kidnapping and his abuse of former partners. The judge noted that Robert had stated he would kill again if he were not put to death. After weighing all the factors, the judge concluded that the only appropriate punishment was the death penalty. On October 20th, 2011, Judge Zell formally sentenced Eric Robert to death. Under South Dakota law, every death sentence must be automatically reviewed by the South Dakota Supreme Court, even if the defendant does not appeal. Robert tried to stop this review. He wanted his execution to happen as quickly as possible. He filed a waiver of appeal, but the Supreme Court said it still had to review the case by law. The court appointed an independent lawyer called an amicus curiae to raise any issues that might have been missed because Robert was not fighting the sentence. The court also reviewed a psychiatric report to make sure Robert was competent to make his decisions. The report showed that he was mentally competent. In August 2012, the South Dakota Supreme Court issued its ruling. The court found that the death sentence was not imposed because of passion, prejudice, or any improper factor. The court also found that the evidence clearly supported the aggravating factors. Finally, the court compared Robert's case to other similar cases in South Dakota and found that the death penalty was neither excessive nor disproportionate. The court upheld the death sentence. After the Supreme Court's decision, the warden of the penitentiary set the execution date. The warden announced that Robert would be executed on Monday, October 15, 2012. At 10 p.m. Robert did not file any further appeals. He wrote a letter to the state attorney general, thanking him for his professionalism and suggesting changes to the law to speed up the death penalty process for future cases. In the letter, Robert said he did not want to die, but he deserved to die. He said that victims and their families deserved swift justice. On the day of the execution, Robert did not eat any food. He had fasted for 40 hours before the procedure. On Saturday evening, 2 days earlier, he had eaten his last meal, which was Moose Tracks ice cream. At 9:31 p.m. on October 15th, Robert was taken from his holding cell. At 9:32 p.m., he was placed on the execution table. The prison staff secured restraints on his body. They started an intravenous line, or 4, in his right arm at 9:37 p.m. They started a second 4 in his left arm at 9:41 p.m. At 9:59 p.m., the warden ordered the curtains opened so that the witnesses could see into the execution chamber. The witnesses included the widow of Ronald Johnson, Lynette Johnson, and her 2 children. No members of Robert's family attended. At 10:01 p.m., the warden asked Robert if he had any last statement. Robert said, "In the name of justice and liberty and mercy, I authorize and forgive Warden Douglas Weber to execute me for my crimes. It is done." Then the staff began injecting a single drug called pentobarbital. The drug stopped his breathing and caused his heart to stop. Robert's eyes remained open throughout the process. He made some heavy gasps and snored for about 30 seconds, then stopped moving. At 10:24 p.m., the coroner checked for a pulse and declared Robert dead. After the execution, Lynette Johnson spoke to the media. She said that the execution would not bring her husband back. It would not bring back her children's father or her grandchildren's grandfather. But she said that the prison employees and the public would be a little safer now that Robert was gone. Robert's lawyer said that the execution process was very orderly and peaceful, but he noted that the cleanliness of the process masked what was actually being done to a person. As for the other people involved, Rodney Burgett also pleaded guilty to the murder and received a death sentence, but he chose to appeal his sentence, so his case continued through the courts. Michael Nordman, the third inmate who provided materials, was sentenced to life in prison. Ronald Johnson's family continued to mourn their loss, and the prison named its training academy after Johnson on the one-year anniversary of his death to honor his service. The execution of Eric Robert was the first execution in South Dakota since 2007, and it brought a formal end to his case. The story of Eric Robert, from his childhood in Wisconsin to his death by lethal injection in South Dakota, ended on October 15, 2012, but the family of Officer Ronald Johnson carried the memory of their husband, father, and grandfather with them for the rest of their lives. Story 3. Bobby Lee Hines was born on July 7, 1972, in Dallas County, Texas. He was a white male. He grew up in that area and lived there for most of his life. His family background was not wealthy. He had at least one older brother. His brother later worked as a maintenance man and manager at an apartment complex. Bobby went to school, but he did not finish high school. He completed 9 years of education. He left school before getting a diploma. As a young teenager, he had trouble in school. One of the most serious incidents happened when he was about 13 years old. Another student refused to give him a sheet of paper. Bobby became angry. He pulled out a knife and tried to cut the other student. He also threatened to kill that student. The teachers and staff had to remove him from the classroom by force. They took him to the principal's office and had to restrain him there. The principal believed that Bobby was a danger to other students and staff. This was not the only problem he caused at school. He had several other disciplinary issues, and he also showed prejudice against minority students. Bobby's criminal behavior started early in his life. When he was only 12 years old, in 1984, he was arrested for stealing a car. He was placed on juvenile probation for 1 year because of that crime. However, he did not follow the rules of his probation, so it was revoked. As a result, he was sent to the Texas Youth Commission, which is a state facility for young offenders. He was confined there for 3 months. In April 1985, he was referred to a juvenile probation officer named Gary Marlowe. Marlowe met with Bobby, gave him counseling, and released him for that time. Shortly after that, Bobby was placed on an informal adjustment. This meant that his parents, the probation officer, and Bobby agreed to certain rules and conditions so they could avoid taking him to court. But this did not stop his problems. In February 1986, he was placed on juvenile probation again because of the school fight where he used the knife. That same year, in April 1986, he got into more serious trouble. He was being transported from a detention facility in Texarkana, Texas. He had been held there for possessing a stolen car. While he was being moved, he escaped from custody. Because of this escape, he was sent back to the Texas Youth Commission. He was confined there for 6 months, and then placed on probation again. But he violated that probation in 1987, so it was revoked. He was sent back to the Texas Youth Commission for another 6 months. In January 1989, Bobby committed more serious crimes. He attacked an elderly woman. The woman was 80 years old. He also burglarized a church. Because of these acts, he was again committed to the Texas Youth Commission. His juvenile probation officer, Gary Marlowe, later gave an assessment of Bobby's character. Marlowe said that Bobby was a legitimate risk to society. He described him as dangerous, unpredictable, and likely to commit further acts of violence in the future. When Bobby became an adult, his criminal activity continued. In May 1990, he pleaded guilty to a charge of burglary of a building. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for this offense. However, Texas had a policy called shock probation at that time. Under this policy, a prisoner could be sent to a short period of incarceration, then released early on probation. Bobby was sent to a boot camp program. He served only about 3 months in prison. On October 19, 1990, he was released on shock probation. He was now placed on 10 years of probation for that burglary. Around that same time, in October 1990, he also pleaded guilty to another separate burglary charge, burglary of a habitation. He received another 10 years of probation for that offense as well. After his release, Bobby worked as a laborer. He lived with his older brother. His brother worked as a maintenance man at an apartment complex. Bobby stayed in the apartment where his brother was living. He was now 19 years old and had a long record of violence, theft, and trouble with the law, but he was out of prison and on probation. On the morning of October 19, 1991, a woman named Marion Lynch drove from out of town to visit her friend Michelle Wendy Haupt. Michelle was 26 years old. She lived alone in an apartment in Carrollton, Texas, which is a suburb northwest of Dallas. Marion planned to spend the weekend with her. When Marion arrived, she brought a carton of Marlboro cigarettes with her. She had bought the carton at a Brookshire store in Corsicana, Texas. Only 4 packs of cigarettes remained inside the carton. The carton had a stamp on the side that said Brookshire's store. Marion left this cigarette carton at Michelle's apartment when they went out for the evening. The 2 women left the apartment and went to a nightclub. While they were at the club, Michelle was wearing a gold necklace with a sand-dollar charm on it. This was a piece of jewelry she always wore. During the evening, Michelle became ill. A friend of hers drove her back to her apartment. When that friend left, he testified later that Michelle locked the door behind him. Marion did not go back to Michelle's apartment that night. Instead, she decided to spend the night with another friend. While all of this was happening, Bobby Lee Hines was in the same apartment complex. He was staying in the apartment of his older brother. His brother worked as the maintenance man for the complex and also served as a manager. Because of that job, his brother had a ring of keys that could open any apartment in the building. Bobby was sleeping on a couch in his brother's apartment, which was located right next door to Michelle Haupt's unit. That same evening, Bobby appeared at a party that was being held somewhere in the apartment complex. He had not been invited to this party. When the hostess asked who he was, he told her that he was the brother of the apartment manager. He also told another guest that he worked as part of the maintenance crew at the complex. Then he pulled out a ring of keys and made a statement to the people at the party. He said that he could get into any apartment he wanted to at any time. This was a clear claim that he had access to every unit in the building. The night passed. Then, at approximately 6 a.m. on October 20th, 1991, a neighbor who lived right next door to Michelle heard a woman screaming. He could not tell exactly where the screams were coming from, but his wife called the police. 2 police officers were sent to the scene. However, by the time they arrived, the screaming had stopped. The officers looked around the premises, but they could not find the source of the noise. They eventually left without taking any action. Other residents had also heard the screams. 2 people who lived in the apartment directly below Michelle's unit were awakened by the noise. They heard loud screaming from above. One of those residents also heard other loud noises. He described the sound as like a bowling ball being dropped on the floor. He heard this sound at least 20 times. The screaming lasted for approximately 15 minutes. A resident in another downstairs apartment nearby also heard the screaming. Later that morning, as it got closer to noon, the residents who had heard the screams began discussing what they had experienced. They became very concerned about Michelle because they knew she lived in the apartment above them. They convinced the apartment leasing manager to check on her. The manager went to Michelle's door and knocked. There was no answer. The manager then opened the door and looked inside. Michelle Haupt was lying on the floor, just inside the doorway. A cord was wrapped tightly around her neck, and her face was black. She appeared to be dead. The manager told someone to call an ambulance. When the medical examiner later examined her body, he found the cause of death was strangulation combined with puncture wounds. The cord around her neck was speaker wire from a stereo. She had abrasions on her neck and jaw, bruises on her neck, and a fractured bone in her throat from the strangulation. She also had approximately 18 puncture wounds on her body. These wounds were found on her chest, her right side, her back, the inside of her vagina, her left arm, and her right thigh. She had tears in her rectum that caused bleeding. The medical examiner said that the puncture wounds could have been made by an object found on the nearby couch. That object looked like an ice pick. There were unusual details about how she was found. She was wearing only a robe. The robe was stained with blood, but it had no holes in it that matched the puncture wounds on her body. This meant that the robe was placed on her after she was stabbed. The belt of the robe was also tied much tighter than a person would normally tie it on their own body. Someone else had tied it for her. Inside the apartment, the police found evidence that pointed to Bobby Hines. His fingerprint was found inside the apartment. His bloody palm print was also found on a wall. The ice pick-like object was on the couch. Now the story moves back to Bobby. He had been staying in his brother's apartment next door. That same day, a search was made of the area where Bobby slept. Under the couch where he had been sleeping, investigators found several items. These included a bowl of pennies and the Brookshire's cigarette carton with 4 packs of cigarettes inside. These items had come from Michelle's apartment. Bobby himself was also examined that day. He had scratches under his eye, scratches on the left side of his neck, and a scratch on his cheek. These scratches were fresh and appeared to come from a struggle. He had blood on some of his clothing. In his pants pocket, he was carrying a gold sand dollar charm. That charm matched the necklace that Michelle had been wearing at the nightclub. The charm had been taken from her apartment. All of these facts, the keys he bragged about, the scratches on his body, the victim's belongings found where he slept, the charm in his pocket, and his fingerprints and palm print inside the apartment, clearly showed that Bobby Lee Hines had entered Michelle's apartment, attacked her, and taken her possessions. But the formal process of questioning, investigation, and arrest had not yet been completed. After the evidence was found in and around the apartment, the police began their formal investigation. Bobby's older brother, who worked as the maintenance man and manager, told the police that he suspected his own brother was involved in the crime. This statement gave the police a clear direction for their inquiry. The police interviewed Bobby Lee Hines on the same day, October 20th, 1991. When they spoke with him, they noticed the fresh scratches on his face and neck. They also observed blood on some of his clothing. The police asked Bobby's roommate, his brother, for consent to search the apartment where Bobby had been staying. The brother gave them permission. During the search, detectives found the cigarette carton and the bowl of pennies under the couch where Bobby slept. They also found the gold sand dollar charm in Bobby's pocket. Based on all of this evidence, the police arrested Bobby that afternoon. He was taken into custody and charged with the crime. On October 21st, 1991, a formal indictment was filed against Bobby in the 204th District Court of Dallas County, Texas. The charge was capital murder. The specific accusation was that he had knowingly and intentionally caused the death of Michelle Wendy Haupt by strangulation and stabbing. The crime was classified as capital murder because it happened during the course of a burglary. He had entered her apartment with the intent to commit theft. The case went to trial in March 1992, only about 5 months after the murder. The trial was held before a jury. During the guilt phase, the prosecution presented all of the physical evidence. The fingerprints, the bloody palm print, the scratches, the blood on his clothes, the victim's belongings found in his possession, and the testimony from neighbors who heard the screams. The defense tried to challenge some of the evidence, including the DNA and blood tests, but the jury found Bobby guilty of capital murder. After the guilty verdict, the trial moved to the penalty phase. This was the part of the trial where the jury had to decide whether Bobby should receive the death penalty or life in prison. During this phase, the prosecution presented evidence about Bobby's past criminal behavior. They showed that he had a long history of violence and trouble with the law, including the knife attack at school, the escape from custody, the attack on the elderly woman, the church burglary, and his adult burglary convictions. A police officer testified that Bobby had a bad reputation as a peaceful and law-abiding citizen. His former juvenile probation officer, Gary Marlowe, also testified. Marlowe stated that Bobby was dangerous, unpredictable, and likely to commit future violent acts. Based on this evidence, the jury decided that Bobby should be sentenced to death. The formal sentence was handed down on March 20th, 1992. After the trial, Bobby began the appeals process. His conviction and death sentence were automatically reviewed by higher courts. On May 10, 1995, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence. This meant they agreed that the trial had been conducted correctly and the punishment was appropriate. Bobby then filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in state court. This is a legal action where a prisoner asks the court to review whether their imprisonment is lawful. On February 24, 1999, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied this petition. He then took his case to federal court. On January 22, 2002, a U.S. District Court denied his petition for federal habeas relief. He appealed that decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. On December 31, 2002, that court also denied his request. He then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review his case, but on October 6, 2003, the Supreme Court denied his petition for certiorari. An execution date was set for December 11, 2003. However, on December 9, 2003, just 2 days before he was scheduled to die, the execution was stayed. The courts granted this stay so that Bobby could pursue claims that he was mentally retarded. Under Supreme Court rules, a person with mental retardation cannot be executed. Over the next several years, this claim was investigated and litigated. On November 23, 2005, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his mental retardation claim. There were further hearings. On March 22, 2010, a magistrate recommended that relief be denied, and on August 18, 2010, the district court adopted that finding and denied relief. The Fifth Circuit denied his request for a certificate of appealability on December 27, 2011, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied his petition on May 14, 2012. After these appeals were exhausted, a new execution date was set for June 6, 2012. However, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office voluntarily asked to postpone the execution. They wanted to conduct new DNA testing on fingernail clippings that had been collected from the victim's body. The prosecution agreed to this delay because they wanted to confirm the evidence. The testing was done, and the results came back. The DNA from the fingernail clippings matched Bobby Lee Hines. This confirmed that he was the person who had attacked Michelle Haupt. After the DNA results were known, the execution was rescheduled for October 24, 2012. In the days leading up to the new execution date, Bobby's lawyers made one final attempt to stop the execution. They filed an appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, arguing that his trial lawyers and early appellate lawyers had failed to investigate and present evidence about how his father had abused him as a child. The court rejected this appeal on October 18, 2012. Also, on October 23, 2012, some of Bobby's relatives and friends filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and other officials. They argued that Bobby's rights had been violated because he had been on death row for more than 20 years and because his lawyers had misled him. A federal judge in Houston dismissed this lawsuit on the day of the execution. On October 24, 2012, at 6:28 p.m. Central Daylight Time, Bobby Lee Hines was pronounced dead at the state prison in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by lethal injection. The drug used was pentobarbital. His final statement was given to the warden before the injection began. He spoke to the victim's family, who were watching through a window. He said, "I know that I took somebody special from y'all. I know it wasn't right, it was wrong. I wish I could give it back, but I know I can't. I wish there was something I could do." He also said he did not believe that taking his life would solve anything. He thought that being locked up for the rest of his life and having to think about what he did would be a worse punishment. He said he loved his family and declared that he was going home. As the lethal dose was administered, he said he could feel it, but he stopped in mid-sentence and lost consciousness. Harold Haupt, Michelle's father, was present to witness the execution. Afterward, he spoke about his loss. He said the pain of losing his daughter never goes away. He noted that Bobby Hines had paid the ultimate price, a life for a life, but he also observed that it had taken 21 years to reach that point, and that Bobby had gone to sleep without suffering the way his daughter had suffered. Bobby Lee Hines was the 11th person executed in Texas in 2012 and the 33rd person executed in the United States that year. He was 40 years old at the time of his death. The case was finally closed, and the legal process had reached its end. The story ends with Bobby Lee Hines executed for the murder of Michelle Wendy Haupt, and her family left to carry the memory of their loss for the rest of their lives. Story 4. Donald Eugene Moeller was born on August 5, 1952, at Sioux Valley Hospital in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. His mother was Melvina Nelson, who was only 17 years old when she gave birth to him. His father was John Moeller, who was 30 years old at the time. John Moeller abandoned his wife before Donald was ever born. Donald never knew his father and grew up without any father figure in his life. After John Moeller left, Melvina began a relationship with a man named Glenn Becker Sr. in the late 1950s. Melvina and Glenn Becker traveled with the Thomas Carnival. They worked at the carnival and moved from place to place. When Donald was still a baby and a toddler, his mother and stepfather would leave him for months at a time with a neighbor's mother. They did not take him with them during those times. They left him behind while they traveled and worked. Later, when Donald was older, his mother and stepfather brought him along on their carnival travels. But they did not take proper care of him. They would tie him to a bus with a rope when they went out drinking and partying. They left him tied up and alone while they enjoyed themselves. This was a regular occurrence during his childhood. Donald's mother was extremely cruel to him. She made it very clear that she did not want him. She frequently expressed her hatred toward him. She beat him severely on a regular basis. On one occasion, she grabbed a hot frying pan from the stove and hit Donald in the head with it. The blow knocked him unconscious to the floor. She regularly called him names such as bastard, red-headed stepchild, and useless nobody. His stepsister, Donna Nichols, later explained that Donald's mother wanted a daughter instead of a son. Because of this, she used to dress Donald in dresses when he was a very small boy. Donald's mother often walked around the house completely naked in front of her children. She told her sons not to tell Glenn Becker about the men she brought to the home when he was away. She would come back from bars with different men and perform sexual acts in front of her children. Donald later told an interviewer that he was sexually abused by 3 different women during his childhood. The family did not celebrate Christmas. They put up no trees and exchanged no presents. The children had very few clothes, and what little clothing they owned, the boys had to wash themselves. All the children slept together in one bedroom on bare mattresses on the floor. There were no sheets or pillows. The mattresses were blackened with dirt because they were never cleaned. Donald started drinking alcohol regularly by the age of 8. He would wait for his mother and stepfather to pass out from drinking so he could consume the half-empty cans of beer and leftover drinks they had left behind. By the time he was 11 years old, he was smoking marijuana. Shortly after that, he began huffing gasoline and other inhalants to get high. Donald's mother and Glenn Becker supplemented their income by breaking into farmhouses and stealing items when the owners were away. They made the children stand watch while they committed these burglaries. On one occasion, Donald stole a color television for his mother. When he brought it to her, she was disappointed because it had a scratch on it. She told Donald to get someone to help him next time so he could steal better items. Despite all of this hardship, there were occasional moments that showed a different side of Donald. His stepmother, Agnes Becker, remembered that he would mow the yard and do other chores for her. His stepsister, Donna Nichols, remembered him playing with her young daughter when he came home at night. She said she completely trusted Donald with her daughter because he was so tender-hearted with her. Donald married twice in his life. His first wife was only 16 years old when they married on April 15, 1972. She gave birth to their daughter on March 5, 1973, which was 11 months after they got married. 5 months after that, while Donald was in prison, she divorced him. Donald did not see his daughter for many years. He married a second time on January 22, 1976, in Sioux Falls. That marriage was also brief and did not produce any children. Throughout his teen years and adult life, Donald had a long history of criminal behavior. Court records show that he was a thief and a bully. He had violent tendencies and used threats to get what he wanted. In January 1973, he pushed his way into a 21-year-old woman's car. He forced her to drive to a cornfield at the east edge of Sioux Falls. He threatened to kill her with a knife if she did not take off her clothes. She refused, and he eventually let her go. He was not charged for that incident. 6 years later, in 1979, Donald was living with a stepsister in Wright, Wyoming. He invited a 13-year-old neighbor boy into his home and gave him alcohol. He tried to sexually assault the boy. When the boy tried to flee, Donald cut his leg with a knife. The boy escaped and told his father. Donald went to prison in Rawlins, Wyoming, for that crime. Donald was not a stupid man. People who knew him, including lawyers and law enforcement officials, said he was intelligent. He was well-read and knowledgeable about many subjects. He was a passionate fan of the Minnesota Twins baseball team and knew a great deal about the sport. He read books about history and the Civil War. He read works by authors like Carl Sandburg and Graham Greene. He enjoyed doing crossword puzzles. Some people who knew him thought that if he had been given the right opportunities in life, he might have become a productive citizen. Despite his intelligence, Donald continued to commit crimes. In November or December of 1989, he met a woman named Tracy Warner through an acquaintance. He did not see her again until January 20th, 1990. On that night, he visited her apartment. He asked if he could stay and watch television with her. She agreed. Later that evening, he took out a knife and ran it up and down her body. He threatened to cut her if she did not lift her shirt. She refused and grabbed the knife, cutting her hand in the process. She ran out of the apartment and called the police. Donald was later caught and charged for that assault. The prosecutors wanted to have Donald put away for life as a habitual offender because of his long criminal record. He was told this news on May 8, 1990, during a meeting with his lawyer. That was the day that would change everything for many people. On May 8, 1990, Donald Moeller left his lawyer's office in Sioux Falls after being told that prosecutors wanted to send him to prison for life as a habitual offender. He had just learned that he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars because of his long criminal record. He left that meeting sometime between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was angry and upset about what he had been told. That same evening, 9-year-old Becky O'Connell was at home with her mother, Tina Curl, and her stepfather, Dave Curl. They lived in a trailer park in Sioux Falls, not far from the state penitentiary. Becky wanted to make lemonade for her family. She needed sugar to make the lemonade. Her mother told her she could go to the nearby SNA convenience store to buy the sugar. Becky left her home around 5:20 p.m. to walk to the store. Becky went to the SNA convenience store, which was located near the intersection of North Drive and Main Avenue. At the store, she bought some Laffy Taffy candy. She then crossed the street to the north side and went into Omar's Market. At Omar's Market, she looked at squirt guns that were on display. She was just a young girl doing ordinary things on a spring evening. Around that same time, a man driving through the area saw a man wearing a black baseball-style cap talking to Becky. They were standing on the pavement near the intersection. The man in the cap was Donald Moeller. Moeller had been at the convenience store earlier that day as well. The store clerk knew him because he was a regular customer who asked the store to stock an unusual brand of cigarettes for him. Moeller somehow convinced Becky to get into his pickup truck. Exactly how he convinced her is not known because there were no witnesses to the actual abduction. But based on the lack of bruises or marks on her body, investigators later believed she may have willingly accepted a ride from him to avoid the rain that was falling that evening. Moeller drove her away from the busy city streets to a secluded area. He drove Becky approximately 14 miles south of Sioux Falls to a wooded area near the Big Sioux River, close to Lake Alvin in Lincoln County. This was a remote, isolated location where no one would see or hear what was about to happen. He stopped his truck in that wooded area. Once they were alone in that secluded spot, Moeller attacked Becky. He raped her. He penetrated her vaginally while she was still alive. He also raped her anally. The evidence later showed that he tore her vagina during the rape. He then took out a knife and began stabbing her. He stabbed her multiple times in her chest, her back, her shoulder, and her hip. He also slashed her throat. The cut to her throat was deep and severed her jugular vein, which is a major blood vessel in the neck. That wound is what ultimately caused her death. During the attack, Becky tried to defend herself. She used her hands to try to block the knife. She received defensive wounds on her hands and arms because she tried to protect herself from the stabbing. But her efforts were not enough to save her. She was only 9 years old and could not fight off a grown man with a knife. After Becky was dead, Moeller continued to assault her body. He anally penetrated her again after she had already died. The lack of blood or bruising around the torn anus later proved that this penetration happened after her heart had stopped beating. He left her naked body lying in the woods alongside a dirt road. Her body was left in a grotesque position. It was a brutal and horrific scene. Moeller then drove away from the area. Around the same time he was leaving, 3 men driving through that secluded tract of land noticed a light blue pickup truck with South Dakota license plates leaving the area. They later described the driver of the truck as matching Moeller's general description. Moeller drove back to Sioux Falls and went about his life as if nothing had happened. Becky did not come home that evening. Her parents grew worried and reported her missing to the police later that night. The police began searching for her. The following morning, May 9, 1990, 2 men went to the wooded area near Lake Alvin to ride their all-terrain vehicles. As they explored the woods, they made a terrible discovery. They found Becky's naked body lying in a ditch. The body had been left in such a shocking state that when the sheriff, Ken Albers, arrived at the scene, he could not believe what he was seeing. It looked so unreal to him that he thought it might be a doll or a sick joke. He had to walk into the crime scene and touch the body with his hand to convince himself that it was real. It was real. It was Becky. An autopsy was performed on Becky's body. The forensic pathologist determined that she had been raped vaginally and anally. She had sustained knife wounds to her throat, shoulder, chest, back, hip, arms, and hands. The pathologist concluded that she died as a result of the cut to her jugular vein in her neck. The knife wounds were extensive and brutal. Police investigators began their work. They collected evidence from the crime scene. They found semen on and inside Becky's body. They collected soil samples from the area where her body was found. They took photographs and interviewed witnesses. The three men who had seen the blue pickup truck leaving the area gave their descriptions to the police. The witness who had seen a man in a black cap talking to Becky near the intersection also came forward. On May 11, 1990, which was 3 days after Becky disappeared and 2 days after her body was found, a police detective spoke with Donald Moeller as part of the investigation. Moeller admitted that he owned a blue pickup truck. He denied having any involvement with Becky's disappearance. To appear cooperative, he voluntarily provided the detective with samples of his blood, his hair, and his fingernail clippings. The detective did not arrest him at that time, but Moeller knew he was a suspect. He became frightened. The very next day, on May 12th or May 13th, 1990, he fled South Dakota. He left behind his sick mother and his truck. He traveled to Tacoma, Washington, which is on the other side of the country. He did not use his real name. He began living under a false identity, calling himself John David Larson. He thought he could escape by running away and hiding. Before he left Sioux Falls, he took a section of the local newspaper, the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader, with him. That section contained a composite sketch of Becky's attacker that police had released to the public. The sketch looked like Moeller. He kept that newspaper section under his bed in his room in Tacoma. He also washed his clothes before he left Sioux Falls. His room was otherwise messy and dirty, but his clothes had been freshly washed, as if he was trying to destroy evidence such as soil or blood. Moeller remained in Tacoma, Washington, living under his false name, for several months. He thought he had gotten away with his crime. He did not know that the police had his blood, hair, and fingernail samples from when he was interviewed. He did not know that the semen found on Becky's body would eventually be matched to him through DNA testing. He did not know that his flight had made him look even more guilty in the eyes of the investigators. 8 months passed. Moeller continued to live in Tacoma under his alias. He carried 2 folding pocket knives with him, similar to the type of knife that had been used to kill Becky. He was careful to keep a low profile, but the investigation in South Dakota was continuing, and the police were closing in on him. They had not yet made an arrest, but they had strong evidence pointing to him as the killer. The investigation into Becky O'Connell's murder continued after Donald Moeller fled to Washington. The police had collected semen from Becky's body during the autopsy. They also had the blood, hair, and fingernail samples that Moeller had voluntarily given them when he was interviewed. The investigators sent these samples to a laboratory for DNA testing. The DNA testing was done using a method called PCR, which stands for polymerase chain reaction. This method could duplicate small amounts of genetic material so that it could be tested. The scientists compared the DNA from the semen found on Becky's body with the DNA from Moeller's blood sample. The results showed that the semen matched Moeller's DNA. The probability that the semen came from someone other than Moeller was extremely low. Without including one specific DNA marker, the probability was 1 in 130 million Caucasians. When all markers were included, the probability was 1 in 14.8 billion Caucasians. This was a very strong piece of evidence linking Moeller to the crime. The police also gathered other evidence. Soil samples taken from the wheel wells of Moeller's pickup truck were compared to soil samples from the crime scene. A soil expert found that the soil from Moeller's truck was very similar to the soil from the area where Becky's body was found. The expert also identified a rare mineral called gonite in both samples. Additionally, A forensic pathologist examined a folding knife that was found in Moeller's possession when he was arrested. The pathologist concluded that the knife was consistent with the wounds on Becky's body, although he could not say it was definitely the murder weapon. In January 1991, approximately 8 months after the murder, the police located Moeller in Tacoma, Washington, where he was living under the false name John David Larson. They arrested him and searched his room. Under his bed, they found a section of the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader newspaper from May 13, 1990. That section contained a composite sketch of Becky's attacker and an article about the crime. This showed that Moeller had been following the case and had fled with evidence of his own guilt. The police also found 2 folding pocket knives in his possession, which were similar to the type of knife used in the murder. Moeller was extradited back to South Dakota to stand trial for Becky's murder. On July 31, 1991, a grand jury indicted him on 1 count of first-degree rape, 1 count of felony murder, and 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder. The state filed a notice that it would seek the death penalty. The first trial began in July 1992. Because of heavy publicity about the case in the Sioux Falls area, the trial was moved to Yankton, South Dakota. At the first trial, the prosecution presented DNA evidence linking Moeller to the semen found on Becky's body. They also presented soil evidence, witness testimony about Moeller being seen near Becky, and evidence that he had fled the state. The defense argued that Moeller was not the killer. On September 1, 1992, the jury found Moeller guilty of first-degree rape and first-degree murder. After a sentencing hearing, the same jury recommended the death penalty. The judge sentenced Moeller to death by lethal injection. However, Moeller appealed his conviction to the South Dakota Supreme Court. In 1996, the Supreme Court reversed the conviction and ordered a new trial. The court ruled that the trial judge had made a serious error. The judge had allowed the prosecution to present evidence of Moeller's prior bad acts, including his attempted sexual assaults in 1973, 1979, and 1990. The Supreme Court said this evidence was improper because it was too dissimilar from the murder of Becky, and because its prejudicial effect outweighed its probative value. The court concluded that Moeller had not received a fair trial and sent the case back for a second trial. Moeller's second trial began in April 1997 in Rapid City, South Dakota. The same 2 defense attorneys represented him. At this trial, the prosecution again presented DNA evidence, soil evidence, and witness testimony. The DNA evidence was even stronger this time because the state introduced additional testing on a marker called APOB. The defense attorneys did not actively challenge the admissibility of the DNA evidence at a pretrial hearing, but they cross-examined the prosecution's experts vigorously during the trial. They also presented their own expert to challenge the soil evidence. The jury once again found Moeller guilty of first-degree rape and first-degree murder. The penalty phase of the second trial began the next day with the same jury. Neither side presented new evidence or called witnesses during this phase. The jury was instructed that they had 2 sentencing options: death by lethal injection or life imprisonment without parole. During their deliberations, the jury sent a question to the judge. They asked if Moeller would ever have a chance to appear before a parole board if they sentenced him to life imprisonment. The judge responded by telling the jury that all the information they needed was in the instructions they had already been given. The jury returned the next day with a sentence of death. Moeller again appealed his conviction and sentence to the South Dakota Supreme Court. In 2000, the Supreme Court affirmed both the conviction and the death sentence. The court found that the trial judge had not made any serious errors in the second trial. Moeller then filed a petition for state habeas corpus, which is a legal action that challenges the legality of a person's imprisonment. The circuit court denied his petition, and the South Dakota Supreme Court affirmed that denial in 2004. Moeller then filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court. He raised several claims, including ineffective assistance of counsel and issues with the jury instructions. The district court denied his petition in 2009. Moeller appealed to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. In 2011, the Eighth Circuit affirmed the district court's decision, meaning that Moeller had exhausted all of his appeals. For many years, Moeller had fought his conviction and death sentence through the courts. He had maintained his innocence for over 2 decades, but in July 2012, he changed his position. He announced that he was ready to accept death as the consequence of his actions. He told a federal judge that he had killed Becky O'Connell and that he deserved to be killed. He said that if the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl did not deserve the death penalty, then nothing did. He dismissed his attorneys who were trying to stop his execution and asked to end all further appeals. His stepsister and stepmother tried to intervene on his behalf, arguing that decades of solitary confinement had made him incapable of making this decision. But the judge dismissed their motions, and Moeller was resolute in his decision. On October 30th, 2012, at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls, Donald Moeller was executed by lethal injection. He was 60 years old. He ate a final meal of scrambled eggs, sausage links, tater tots, and drip coffee. At 9:38 p.m., he was taken from his holding cell to the execution chamber. At 9:49 p.m., the intravenous lines were inserted into his arms. When the warden asked if he had any last words, Moeller replied, "No, sir." Then he said something that sounded like, "They're my fan club?" Prison officials later said he appeared to be referring to other inmates who were cheering in a nearby housing unit. At 10:01 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered. Moeller took about 8 heavy breaths. Within a couple of minutes, his breathing stopped. His face turned ashen and then purple. At 10:24 p.m., the coroner checked for vital signs and declared him dead. Becky O'Connell's mother, Tina Curl, and her stepfather, Dave Curl, had driven 1,400 miles from their home in New York to witness the execution. They had raised funds through donations to pay for their trip. After the execution, they held a press conference. Tina Curl showed 3 pictures, one of Becky as a child, one of her at Becky's grave on what would have been Becky's 32nd birthday, and a composite sketch of what Becky might have looked like at age 32. Dave Curl read a statement saying that finally justice had been done for Becky. He said Moeller would never take another breath or hurt another child. But he also said that Moeller's death did not bring them closure. He said there would never be closure for them. They both expressed their hatred for Moeller and said they would hate him until the day they died. Tina Curl said she still carried guilt for letting Becky go to the store by herself that evening. She said she had hoped Moeller would tell her how he had lured Becky into his truck, but he never answered her questions. After the execution, the Curls returned to New York with the sketch of Becky and the clothes Becky was wearing when she was murdered. They said they would not come back to South Dakota. Moeller's body was cremated. His remains, along with his Bible and other possessions, were claimed by his stepmother, Agnes Becker, who was the woman he had the closest family relationship with. Some family members, including his stepsister Donna Nichols, said they were sad for what Moeller had done and also sad for him. They said there were people who loved him and were crying for him too. The execution closed the final chapter on a case that had haunted Sioux Falls and the state of South Dakota for more than 2 decades. The man who had committed one of the most horrific crimes in the state's history was now dead, and the legal process that had begun with a missing girl on a rainy evening in May 1990 was finally over. Donald Eugene Moeller was executed on October 30th, 2012, for the rape and murder of 9-year-old Becky O'Connell, and he took his secrets to the grave. Story 5. Donnie Lee Roberts Jr. was born on February 9, 1971. He was a white male. He grew up in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. This is a rural area in the northern part of the state. His family lived there, and he spent most of his early life in that region. Donnie had a brother. The two brothers did not always get along well. There is a record of one very serious incident between them. Donnie beat his brother so badly that the brother had to be taken to a hospital by helicopter. This happened on his brother's wedding night. This was an early sign that Donnie could become very violent when he was angry. Donnie went to school but did not finish high school. He completed 11 years of education. After he left school, he worked as a builder and as a laborer. These were physical jobs that did not require a high school diploma. He worked when he could, but he did not always stay in one job for a long time. As Donnie grew older, he developed problems with alcohol and drugs. He drank alcohol often. He also started using cocaine. His cocaine use became a serious addiction. He would go to bars, drink, and then look for drugs. This pattern became a regular part of his life. His habits cost him money and made it hard for him to keep steady work. Donnie also had a criminal history that started before the main events of this story. In 1992, he was involved in a death in Louisiana. A man named Al Crow was killed. At first, authorities believed Crow had died from smoke or fire in his camper trailer. But later, after Donnie confessed, they found shotgun pellets and reclassified it as a murder. Donnie was not tried for this crime, but he did admit to it. This was a serious red flag from his past. In 2001, Donnie committed another crime. On Mother's Day of that year, he held up a convenience store in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He used a knife and threatened to cut the throat of the female clerk who was working there. He took money from the store. For this crime, he was convicted of armed robbery. He was given a sentence that included a drug treatment program. He was supposed to complete this program as part of his parole. But Donnie did not complete the program. He fled from Louisiana. He left the state and went to Texas. By doing this, he violated his parole. He was now a fugitive from supervision. He went to Polk County, Texas, because he had relatives living there. He thought he could start over or hide there. While in Polk County, Donnie met a woman named Vicki Bowen. She was a dental assistant. She worked at a local dental office in Livingston, Texas. She was a punctual and reliable person. She had a job, a home, and a son. She lived in a house near Lake Livingston. Donnie met her at a bar. They began a relationship, and he moved into her home. They became live-in boyfriend and girlfriend. At the time he moved in, Donnie did not have a job. He was unemployed. He continued to drink alcohol and use cocaine. Vicki worked hard every day. She went shopping with a coworker on one day, and she always showed up for work on time. She was known as someone who called if she was going to be late. Donnie, on the other hand, did not contribute money to the household. He spent his time looking for drugs and drinking. Their relationship became strained because of his habits and his lack of work. Vicki was not happy with his behavior. She was a stable person, and he was not. Donnie also had a wife and a daughter from earlier in his life. He had threatened his wife in the past, demanding money for drugs. He had a history of making threats. He also had a battery charge from an incident in a jail in Fulton County, Georgia, where he beat up a cellmate. While he was in jail in Polk County for later events, he even warned officers that there would be another killing if he did not get a single-person cell. These incidents showed that he had a pattern of violent and threatening behavior. Despite these problems, Donnie continued to live with Vicki. He remained unemployed. He kept using cocaine and drinking alcohol. His need for money to buy drugs grew stronger. He did not have a regular income. Vicki was the one who worked and paid for things. Donnie would sometimes ask her for money, but she did not always give it to him. She was growing tired of his behavior. By the middle of October 2003, the situation in the house was tense. Vicki was working hard, and Donnie was not. He needed money for his habits, but he had no job. He had relatives nearby, but he was not getting help from them. He was living day to day, drinking and using cocaine, while Vicky went to work and supported herself. This was the situation on October 15th, 2003. Donnie was living in Vicky's home. He was unemployed. He was addicted to alcohol and cocaine. He needed money. Vicky had gone shopping with a coworker that day. She came home wearing her work scrubs. Donnie was there. They were alone together in the house. He wanted money from her, and she refused. On October 15th, 2003, Vicky Bowen came home after shopping with her coworker, Brenda Bland. She was still wearing the blue scrubs she had worn at work that day. Donnie Roberts was at the house. They were alone. He was unemployed and needed money to buy cocaine. He asked Vicky for money. She refused to give him any. Donnie picked up a .22 caliber rifle that was near the door of the house. He pointed the gun at Vicky. He told her to give him some money. She said no. He then said, "Look, it doesn't have to be this way." That was the last thing he remembered saying to her. The next thing he knew, he shot her. He fired the gun multiple times. 2 bullets hit Vicky in the head. She died from those gunshot wounds. She fell to the floor and was face down. Blood spread around her head and onto the floor. Blood spatters also went onto the coffee table, the couch, and the walls of the living room. After shooting Vicky, Donnie did not call for help. He did not try to save her. Instead, he covered her body with a blanket. He left her lying on the floor in the pool of blood. Then he began to take things from the house. He took her son's truck from the property. He took a television. He took football tickets for a Texans and Titans game. He took some jewelry. He took a Western Union money order. He also took 2 guns. One was the .22 caliber rifle that he had used to shoot Vicky. The other was a .22 caliber pistol that was also in the house. Donnie left the house with all these items. He drove away in the son's truck. He went into the town of Livingston. He needed cocaine. He went to a drug dealer named Edwin Gary. He bought cocaine from Edwin Gary on October 15th. He did this not just once, but 3 separate times that same day. The first 2 times, he used money to buy the cocaine. The last time, he did not have money left. So he traded the .22 caliber pistol to Edwin Gary in exchange for cocaine. This was how he got his drugs after he had used all his cash. Donnie also sold the football tickets. He sold them for $100. He used that money to buy more cocaine. He was desperate to feed his addiction. He did not keep the murder weapon. He abandoned the .22 caliber rifle a few blocks away from where he eventually stopped. He did not try to hide it carefully. He just left it there. He parked the son's truck at a residence where he was staying. He left the Western Union money order inside that residence. However, the television and the jewelry were never found again. He had taken them, but they disappeared. At this point, no one knew that Vicky had been killed. The next day, October 16th, 2003, Vicky was supposed to go to work. She worked as a dental assistant. She was a punctual person. She always showed up on time. She always called if she was going to be late. But that morning, she did not arrive at work. She did not call. Her coworker, Brenda Bland, became very worried. She knew that Vicky would not miss work without calling. Brenda decided to go to Vicky's house to check on her. When she arrived, she saw that the front door was open. This was unusual. Brenda knocked on the door. No one answered. She was concerned, so she went inside. Inside the living room, she found Vicky. Vicky was lying face down on the floor. Her head was turned to the side. A blanket was covering her body. She was still wearing the same scrubs she had worn the day before when she went shopping. Brenda saw that Vicky was not moving. She saw blood everywhere. There was a large pool of blood around Vicky's head. There were blood spatters on the coffee table, on the couch, and on the walls. Brenda knew that Vicky was dead. Brenda also noticed that some things were missing from the house. She saw that the television was gone. She knew that Vicky's son's truck was usually parked outside, but it was not there. She did not know who had taken these things, but she knew something was very wrong. She did not take any action herself except to realize that these items were gone. Brenda contacted the authorities because she had found a dead body. The police were called to the scene. When they arrived, they examined the house. They confirmed that Vicky was dead. They saw the blood spatters. They saw the missing television and the missing truck. They also later learned that other items were missing, including the football tickets, the jewelry, the money order, and the guns. However, at that time, they did not yet know who had committed the crime. They had not yet found Donnie. They had not yet arrested anyone. The investigation was just beginning. But one thing was already clear to anyone looking at the scene. Vicky Bowen had been shot to death in her own home. The person who did it had taken her belongings and driven away. The killer had left her body covered by a blanket on the floor. The crime had happened the day before, and no one had discovered it until Brenda came to check. The police investigation began immediately after Brenda Bland found Vicky Bowen's body on October 16, 2003. The officers examined the house and saw that the television and Vicky's son's truck were missing. They knew these items had been taken by the killer. The police started searching for the truck because it was the most visible clue. They tracked the truck down that same day. It was located outside a residence in Livingston, Texas. This residence was known to be a place where people used crack cocaine. The police went to that location and found Donnie Roberts there. They arrested him right away. When Donnie was arrested, he did not deny what he had done. He was cooperative with the police. He confessed to the murder multiple times. He also said something very striking. He told the officers, "I want the death penalty." He made this statement on a videotaped recording. He was not trying to hide his guilt. He admitted that he had a crack cocaine problem and that he needed money. During the interview, he explained what happened. He said, "I pointed the gun at her and I told her just give me some money." He then said, "I pointed the gun at her and I said, 'If you just give me some money.' And she said no. And then I said, 'Look, it doesn't have to be this way.' That's all I remember saying to her. And the next thing I know, I shot her." This confession was recorded and would later be used as evidence against him. But Donnie did more than just confess to Vicky's murder. During the investigation, he also surprised the detectives. He confessed to another killing that had happened years earlier in Louisiana. He admitted that he had killed a man named Al Crow in Natchitoches Parish in 1992. He said he had shot the man and then set the camper trailer on fire. Louisiana authorities had originally believed Crow died from the fire, but after Donnie's confession, they reopened the case. They found shotgun pellets and confirmed that it was a homicide. Donnie was charged with that murder, but he was never tried for it. The police also recovered important physical evidence. They found the .22 caliber rifle that had been used to kill Vicky. Donnie had abandoned it a few blocks from where he was arrested. The money order was found inside the residence where he had parked the truck. The jewelry and the television were never found. But the police had enough evidence to charge Donnie with capital murder. On November 24, 2003, a grand jury in Polk County, Texas, indicted Donnie Lee Roberts for the murder of Vicky Bowen. The charge was capital murder because the killing happened during a robbery. The state argued that Donnie had demanded money from Vicky and shot her when she refused, and then he took her property. This made it a murder in the course of a robbery, which is capital murder under Texas law. Donnie's trial began in October 2004. During the trial, Donnie changed his story. He testified in his own defense. He claimed that he had acted in self-defense. He said he saw the rifle out of place near the door and picked it up. He also said he saw what looked like a pistol in Vicky's pocket and that she moved her hand toward it. He said he must have chambered a round and fired, but he did not remember pulling the trigger. He denied that he intended to rob Vicky. He admitted taking her property later, but he said that was only an afterthought. He tried to frame the conflict as a domestic dispute over money, not a robbery. The jury did not believe his new story. They had his confession on video. They knew he had traded the pistol for cocaine and sold the football tickets. They knew he had taken the truck and the television. On October 15, 2004, exactly 1 year after the murder, the jury found Donnie guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether Donnie should receive the death penalty or life in prison. During this phase, the prosecution presented evidence about Donnie's past. They showed that he had a history of violence. They presented the victim of his 2001 convenience store robbery, who testified about the fear and trauma she experienced. They showed that he had beaten his brother severely. They showed that he had confessed to the 1992 murder of Al Crow. They also presented evidence that he had threatened his wife for money, and that he had warned jail officers that there would be another killing if he did not get a single cell. The defense tried to present mitigating evidence, including testimony about his drug and alcohol addictions. But the jury decided that Donnie was still a future danger to society. On October 27, 2004, the jury sentenced Donnie Lee Roberts to death. After the sentence, Donnie's lawyers began appeals. They argued that the trial court had made mistakes. They argued that some evidence should not have been allowed. They argued that Donnie's lawyer had been ineffective. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case. On April 18, 2007, that court affirmed Donnie's conviction and death sentence. His lawyers then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court denied his petition on October 1, 2007. Donnie also filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the U.S. District Court. That court denied his petition on November 7, 2011. He appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On May 15, 2012, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the denial of his habeas petition. On July 11, 2012, the State District Court set his execution date for October 31, 2012. Donnie's lawyers filed one last petition with the U.S. Supreme Court, but on October 29, 2012, the Supreme Court refused to review his case. No more appeals were filed. On October 31, 2012, Donnie Lee Roberts was moved from the Polunsky Unit, where death row inmates are housed, to the Huntsville Unit, where executions are carried out. That evening at 6 p.m., he was given a lethal injection. Before the drugs began, he spoke his last words. He said, "I am truly sorry. I never meant to cause y'all so much pain. Not one day has passed that I wish I could take it back. After today, I hope you can go on. I hope this brings you closure. God knows I didn't want to do what I did. I loved your daughter. I hope to God he lets me see her in heaven so I can apologize to her." He then took several deep breaths, began snoring briefly, and slipped into unconsciousness. At 6:39 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Vicky Bowen's family watched the execution. They declined to speak to reporters afterward. The murder had taken their daughter, sister, and mother. They had waited 9 years for justice. After the execution, the case was officially closed. Donnie Lee Roberts was the 489th person executed in Texas since 1976. He was 41 years old. The final sentence for Vicky Bowen's killer had been carried out. Donnie Lee Roberts was executed by lethal injection on October 31, 2012, and the case of Vicky Bowen's murder was finally closed. Story 6. Gary Thomas Allen was born on February 25, 1956. He was a black male who grew up in Oklahoma. His childhood was marked by severe poverty. His family did not have enough money for food, and he often went hungry. His mother was an alcoholic. This meant she drank alcohol heavily and could not take care of her children properly. She also rejected Gary emotionally. She did not show him love, care, or affection. His family life was very unstable. There was no sense of safety or routine in his home. Mental illness ran in both sides of his family. His parents and other relatives had mental health problems. Gary had brothers and sisters. Every one of his siblings became an alcoholic too. This shows that alcohol abuse was a common problem in his family. Growing up in this environment had a deep effect on Gary. When Gary became a teenager, his mental health began to get worse. He suffered from debilitating mood swings. This means his emotions would change suddenly and strongly, and he could not control them. He tried to kill himself 5 or 6 times during his teenage years. These suicide attempts showed that he was in a lot of emotional pain. He started drinking alcohol and using drugs when he was about 17 or 18 years old. He used these substances to try to feel better, but they only made his problems worse. Gary went to school, but he did not finish. He dropped out of high school. Before dropping out, he was placed in the Boley State School for 6 months. This was a state-run facility for young people who had behavioral or educational problems. The environment at Boley was violent. Being there did not help Gary. It only exposed him to more problems. After leaving school, Gary joined the United States Navy. He served in the military for some time. While he was in the Navy, his mental health problems continued. He was hospitalized for psychological issues. This meant he had to be placed in a hospital because his mind was not working well. He also continued to abuse alcohol and drugs during his time in the Navy. His substance abuse was a pattern that followed him everywhere. After leaving the Navy, Gary was admitted to the Oklahoma City Veterans Administration Hospital. He went there because he had more psychological problems. The doctors and staff tried to help him, but his mental condition did not fully improve. He continued to struggle with his emotions and his behavior. Gary was a bright man. Tests showed that he had a high intelligence level. He had the ability to understand complex ideas. Despite his intelligence, he could not keep his life stable. He got married and had a wife. He also had a daughter named Chandra from that marriage. But his marriage did not last. His relationship with his ex-wife was marked by violent arguments. He could not control his temper. He would get angry and fight with her. His poor impulse control meant that he acted without thinking about the consequences. Drinking alcohol made this problem much worse. Whenever he drank, his temper became even harder to control. Gary later had 2 more children with a woman named Lawana Gale Titsworth. He had 2 sons with her. The boys were named Anthony and Adrian. Gary and Lawana became engaged to be married. He was her fiancé. They lived together for a time with their 2 sons. But their relationship was not peaceful. They had many angry confrontations. Gary would get into arguments with Lawana. He had a pattern of violent behavior toward the women in his life. His ex-wife had also experienced his violent temper. This pattern of violence was something that kept repeating in his relationships. Despite all of these problems, Gary also showed some ability to function. He completed 28 hours of college coursework between 1977 and 1986. He earned good grades during that time. This showed that he could focus on learning when he chose to. But his drinking and his mental health issues always pulled him back down. He drank as often as he could. He would get drunk as many days in the week as possible. He said later that he could drink as much as he could afford to buy. Alcohol was a central part of his daily life. By the time Gary reached his late 20s, his life was a cycle of drinking, arguments, and unstable relationships. He had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse. He had been hospitalized for mental illness. He had been in violent confrontations with his ex-wife and with his fiancée. He could not keep his emotions under control. His family was broken. He was a father, but he could not provide a stable home for his children. He continued to drink heavily. He continued to get into fights with the people close to him. The people around him could see that he had problems. He was a man who could not stop himself from acting out in anger. His life was heading in a direction that would only get worse. Gary Allen's pattern of drinking and violent arguments continued into November 1986. By this time, his fiancée Lawana Gale Titsworth had had enough of his behavior. She decided to leave him. On November 17, 1986, she moved out of the home she shared with Gary. She took their 2 sons with her. The boys were 6-year-old Anthony and 2-year-old Adrian. Lawana wanted to get away from Gary and his temper. The 3 days after Lawana left were filled with anger. Gary did not accept that she had left him. He tried many times to convince her to come back. He kept confronting her. He would find her and argue with her. He wanted her to return to him. Each time, she refused. This made Gary more and more upset. His drinking continued during these days. He was intoxicated often. On November 21, 1986, Lawana went to pick up her sons from their daycare center. The daycare was called Beulah's Daycare Center. It was located in Oklahoma City on Northwest 8th Street. Lawana arrived at the daycare at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Gary found out she would be there. He went to the daycare too. He arrived shortly after Lawana got there. When Gary entered the daycare center, he saw Lawana inside. The 2 of them began to argue right there in the building. They moved into an empty room so they could argue without other people watching. No one knows exactly what was said, but the argument was heated and angry. After some time, Gary left the room. He left the daycare center. Lawana thought the confrontation was over. A few minutes later, Lawana came out of the daycare center with her 2 sons. She walked to her truck in the parking lot. She opened the door of her truck to put her children inside. At that moment, Gary came up behind her. He had not actually left. He was waiting for her outside. He shut the door of the truck. She opened it again. He shut it again. This went back and forth. Gary would not let her get into her vehicle. The argument continued there in the parking lot. Then Gary reached down into his sock. He had a .38 caliber snub-nosed revolver hidden there. He pulled the gun out. He pointed it at Lawana. He shot her twice in the chest. The bullets entered her body. She was hit and fell to the ground. After she fell, Lawana began to beg for her life. She pleaded with Gary not to shoot her again. She asked him to stop. Gary then asked Lawana if she was all right. He lifted up her blouse. He looked under her clothing. It seemed like he was trying to see how badly she was hurt. Then he walked away. Some daycare employees were in the parking lot during this time. They saw what happened. Several children were also in a van that was parked only a few feet from Lawana's truck. The children were very close to the shooting. Lawana's 2-year-old son, Adrian, was with his mother. It is not entirely clear if she was holding him at the moment of the first shots or if she had already put him down. Either way, the children were right there when the gun went off. Despite being shot twice in the chest, Lawana managed to get up. She was badly hurt, but she tried to escape. She started running toward the daycare building. A daycare employee ran to help her. The employee tried to get Lawana to safety inside the building. They reached the steps leading to the front door of the daycare center. As they climbed the steps, Gary came back. He had not gone far. He returned to the scene. He pushed the daycare employee through the door. Then he shoved Lawana down onto the steps. She fell to the ground. Gary stood over her. He shot her 2 more times at close range. These shots hit her in the back. Lawana Gale Titsworth died there on the steps of the daycare center. The people inside and outside the daycare saw everything. They called 911 immediately. A police officer named Mike Taylor was on patrol nearby. He was driving in the area when the emergency call came in. He responded within minutes. He arrived at the daycare center very quickly. When Officer Taylor got to the scene, a witness pointed toward an alley. The witness said Gary had gone into that alley. The alley was less than a block away from the daycare. Officer Taylor drove into the alley. He spotted Gary Allen hiding there. Officer Taylor pulled out his service revolver. He ordered Gary to stop moving. He told him to stand still and not move. Gary followed this order at first. He stopped and stood still. But then Gary turned around. He started walking away from the officer. Officer Taylor followed him. He reached out to place his hand on Gary. At that moment, Gary quickly turned around. He grabbed Officer Taylor's gun with his hands. A struggle began immediately. The two men fought over the weapon. During the struggle, Gary got partial control of the gun. He started trying to make Officer Taylor shoot himself. Gary applied pressure to Taylor's finger while the finger was still on the trigger. He was trying to force Taylor to pull the trigger and shoot his own body. The officer fought back. He tried to regain control of his weapon. The struggle continued. Eventually, Officer Taylor managed to get control of the gun again. He turned the gun away from himself. He fired one shot. The bullet hit Gary Allen in the face. The shot went through his left eye area. Gary collapsed from the wound. Gary was taken to the hospital immediately. He had severe injuries. The bullet had caused damage to his face, his left eye, and his brain. He had an air pocket in the front part of his brain. Cerebral spinal fluid was leaking from his nose and ear. These were serious and life-threatening injuries. Gary remained in the hospital for about 2 months. He had multiple surgeries. He lost his left eye permanently. He also suffered permanent brain damage from the gunshot wound. While Gary was in the hospital, the police investigated what had happened. They gathered evidence from the scene. They spoke to the daycare employees who saw the shooting. They collected the gun that Gary had used. They built their case against him. After Gary was released from the hospital, he was taken to court. The charges against him were serious. He was charged with first-degree murder for killing Luana. He was also charged with assault and battery with a dangerous weapon for the attack on Officer Taylor. He was charged with possession of a firearm after a former conviction of a felony. This was because he had previously been convicted of pointing a weapon at people in 1982. Gary had a long history of mental health problems. His lawyers were concerned about his mental state. In January 1987, his lawyer asked the court to determine if Gary was competent to go to trial. The judge ordered a competency evaluation. Gary was sent to Eastern State Hospital for observation and treatment. The doctors at Eastern State Hospital examined Gary. At first, they found he was not able to assist his lawyer in preparing a defense. But after 4 months of treatment, the doctors said he was competent. They said he could understand the charges against him. They said he could help his lawyer. In October 1987, a jury was impaneled to decide the competency question. The jury heard testimony from doctors and witnesses. They found Gary was competent to stand trial. Just 3 weeks after the competency trial, Gary decided to enter a plea. He did not want to go to trial. He wanted to plead guilty to the murder charge. His lawyers advised him against this. They thought he should go to trial. But Gary insisted on pleading guilty. On November 10, 1987, Gary appeared before a judge. He entered a blind plea of guilty to first-degree murder. A blind plea means there was no agreement with the prosecutors about what the sentence would be. Gary did not know what punishment he would receive. He was not promised anything in exchange for his plea. The judge questioned Gary in court. He asked if Gary understood what he was doing. The judge also asked Gary's lawyer if she believed he was competent. The lawyer told the judge that Gary had assisted her with his defense. She said she had no reason to believe he was not competent. The judge accepted the plea. Gary also signed a written document. In that document, he stated the facts of the crime in his own handwriting. He wrote, "I shot and killed Gail Titsworth. I had no justifiable cause." This meant he admitted he did not have a legal excuse for what he did. At his sentencing hearing, Gary explained why he pleaded guilty. He said he wanted to spare his family and Luana's family from more pain. He did not want them to have to go through a trial. He did not want them to have to testify in court and relived the terrible events. He said, "I can't see making a bad matter worse. Bringing up the problems we were having and what motivated me to do what I did. It just makes things worse than ever." The judge considered all the evidence. He looked at the aggravating factors and the mitigating factors. The aggravating factors were things that made the crime worse. The judge found that Gary had a previous conviction for a violent felony. He found that Gary posed a continuing threat to society. He also found that Gary created a great risk of death to more than one person. The judge considered the mitigating factors too. These were things that might make the crime less severe, like Gary's difficult childhood and his mental health problems. After weighing everything, the judge made his decision. He sentenced Gary Thomas Allen to death. The judge ordered that Gary be executed for the murder of Lawana Gale Titsworth. After the judge sentenced Gary Allen to death in December 1987, the case did not end. Gary had the right to appeal his sentence. This means he could ask higher courts to review what happened in his trial. His lawyers argued that mistakes had been made. The first appeal went to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. In 1991, that court made a decision. They agreed with Gary's conviction for murder. But they said the judge had made a mistake at sentencing. The mistake was that the judge did not consider a new sentencing option that had become law just 10 days before the sentencing. That option was life in prison without the possibility of parole. The appeals court sent the case back to the trial court. They ordered a new sentencing hearing. In 1993, a second sentencing hearing was held. Gary was again sentenced to death. The judge found the same aggravating factors again. He believed the death penalty was the right punishment. Gary's lawyers appealed again. In 1996, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case again. They looked at the evidence from the second sentencing. They agreed that 2 of the aggravating factors were valid. They said the evidence proved Gary had been previously convicted of a violent felony and that he would be a continuing threat to society. However, they disagreed with one factor. They said the evidence did not prove that Gary created a great risk of death to more than one person. Even with that factor removed, the court decided the death sentence was still appropriate. They affirmed the death penalty. Gary's lawyers kept fighting. They took the case to the United States Supreme Court. In 1997, the Supreme Court sent the case back to Oklahoma. They wanted the state court to reconsider Gary's competency to enter his guilty plea. A recent Supreme Court decision had changed the rules about how competency had to be proved. The Oklahoma court reviewed the issue again. They looked at the transcripts from the plea hearing. They concluded that Gary had been competent when he pleaded guilty. They said the judge had asked the right questions. They also noted that Gary's own lawyer had told the judge he was competent. The court reinstated the death sentence. Over the next several years, more appeals followed. Gary's lawyers argued that he was not mentally competent to be executed. They said his mental condition had gotten worse while he was on death row. They presented evidence that he had schizophrenia and brain damage. They said the U.S. Constitution forbids executing someone who is insane. The state disagreed. They argued that Gary was faking his symptoms, or that his condition was not severe enough to stop the execution. In 2005, Gary was scheduled to be executed for the first time. His execution was set for May 19, 2005. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board held a hearing. This board can recommend that a governor change a death sentence to life in prison. The board voted 4-1 to recommend that Gary's sentence be commuted to life without parole. They believed there were reasons to spare his life. However, the governor at that time did not act on this recommendation. It was left unresolved for many years. Just one day before the scheduled execution in May 2005, a judge halted the procedure. The judge ordered a stay of execution. This means the execution was put on hold. The reason was that a psychological exam at the prison indicated Gary had developed mental problems while on death row. The doctors found he had dementia. This condition was caused by seizures, his long history of drug abuse, and the gunshot wound to his face. The court wanted to review these new findings before allowing the execution to go forward. In 2008, a jury was impaneled to decide if Gary was sane enough to be executed. The jury heard arguments from both sides. They listened to doctors and experts. After considering the evidence, the jury made a split decision. They determined that Gary was sane to be executed. This meant the legal barrier to his execution was removed. The stay of execution was later vacated, meaning it was lifted. In 2012, the state moved forward with the execution again. Gary was scheduled for execution on February 16, 2012, but the governor, Mary Fallin, granted a 30-day stay. She said she needed more time to consider the 2005 clemency recommendation from the parole board. She wanted to review all the arguments and evidence carefully before making a final decision. After reviewing everything, Governor Fallin denied clemency. She wrote an executive order stating that she had determined the death sentence should be carried out. The execution was rescheduled for April 12, 2012. As the April 12th date approached, Gary's lawyers filed another emergency appeal. They again argued that he was insane. They said his mental state had deteriorated further. A federal judge agreed to review these claims. The judge issued another stay of execution on April 11th, just one day before Gary was to die. The judge said the claims about Gary's mental condition needed to be properly examined. The state appealed this decision. They wanted the stay lifted, but their appeal was not granted at that time. The execution was postponed again. Gary's lawyers continued to fight in the federal courts. In September 2012, a federal district court judge rejected Gary's claim that he was too mentally incompetent to be executed. The judge lifted the stay of execution. Gary's lawyers appealed this decision to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. On October 31, 2012, that court upheld the lower court's decision. They denied the motion to stay the execution. All legal avenues appeared to be exhausted. The new execution date was set for November 6, 2012. This was the day of the United States presidential election. On that day, Gary Thomas Allen was taken to the death chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. The execution was scheduled for 6 o'clock in the evening. Witnesses gathered to observe the procedure. 2 media representatives were present. 2 of Gary's attorneys were there to support him. The victim's sister-in-law attended on behalf of Lawana's family. Officials from the Department of Corrections were also present. At 5:58 p.m., the Director of Corrections gave the order to begin. The blinds between the witness area and the execution chamber were raised. Gary raised his head from the gurney. He looked into the witness room. His eyes moved around until he saw familiar faces. When he spotted his attorneys, he said hi to them. They lifted their hands and waved back. Gary then began to talk. He rambled in a way that was hard to understand. His speech was garbled. He talked about the presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. He said, "Obama won 2 out of 3 counties. It's going to be a very close race." At the same time, a loud banging noise could be heard. This was the other inmates in H Unit saying their goodbyes. They were banging on their cell doors to show support for Gary. The deputy warden asked Gary if he had a final statement. Gary looked at the warden and said, "Huh." He then continued his garbled speech. He talked about Obama and Jesus. He said, "I hope that more realize Jesus is the Son of God, the only Son of God. Jesus is the one and only Savior." His words were still difficult to follow. He kept rambling. The deputy warden told Gary that his 2 minutes were almost over. Gary turned his head and asked, "What?" He kept talking in his garbled way. One of his attorneys began to cry. She leaned down and placed her head in her hands. At 6:02 p.m., the deputy warden said, "Let the execution begin." Gary turned his head again and asked, "Huh?" He lifted his head and looked at the witnesses. He focused on his attorneys. He said hi to them once more. They waved back at him. Then the execution drugs began to flow into his body. Gary made a loud, strained grunting sound. He wiggled his feet. He lifted his head one last time and looked at the warden. Then he laid his head back down on the gurney. The life slowly left his body. At 6:07 p.m., the attending physician checked Gary's vital signs. The doctor said something about a pulse. The physician rubbed Gary's chest. Then the doctor stepped away. Gary's attorney wiped a tear from her cheek. A few minutes later, the physician checked again. At 6:10 p.m., the doctor pronounced Gary Thomas Allen dead. After the execution, the victim's family released a written statement. They expressed their grief and relief. They said, "Our beloved Gail, daughter, sister, and mother of 2 young boys, was taken from our family tragically and senselessly due to domestic violence. For over 25 years we have waited for justice to be served and for this sentence to be carried out. We are thankful to close the book on this chapter today, but we will never stop grieving the loss of Gail. Gail's memory will continue to live on through the lives of her now grown sons and her grandchildren." Gary's final meal before his execution was a large meat lover's pizza and a Pepsi. His final words were the rambling statements he made in the death chamber. He was the 101st person executed in Oklahoma since 1976. He was the 36th person executed in the United States in 2012. Gary Thomas Allen was buried after his execution. His 2 sons, Anthony and Adrian, grew up without their mother. They became adults and had children of their own. They carried their mother's memory with them throughout their lives. The case was finally closed after more than 25 years of legal battles, appeals, and delays. The story of Gary Thomas Allen ended in the execution chamber on November 6, 2012, when he took his last breath and was pronounced dead at 6:10 p.m.